Hey everyone, and welcome to Story Time with Andy. This is the famous story of my ride along with the East Palo Alto Police back in 1998. It was actually a couple months after Eve and I just got married. We just moved into our house in Palo Alto, and I had been talking to her for a long time about how interesting it would be to do a ride along sometime with a police officer, see what it's like, a day in the life. Check it out, and I'd always talked about it, and one day we were downtown in Palo Alto, and a police officer walked in. He was actually a motorcycle cop, and I turned to him and said, "Hey, how you doing? Officer, would you be willing someday to, bring along someone like me on a ride along?" And kind of expected a conversation about it. And the guy was just very matter of fact. He just pulled out his card and said, "Here you go. Give me a call anytime." And I looked at the card, and the guy's name was Officer Jeffrey Justice. And I was like, "Wow, that's impressive, man. Cool. All right." So, I just put the card away, and I kind of forgot about it. I think probably a couple months went by. I just stuck the card in a drawer at work and wasn't really thinking much about ride-alongs or anything. I was just all work and no play kind of thing. And it was a Friday evening, and I was kind of feeling just grinding away and, not really anything interesting going on. And somebody was leaving work that evening, and I asked her, "Hey, how you doing? Have a good weekend. What are you going to do this weekend?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm actually going tonight to volunteer for a suicide hotline." And I thought, whoa, what a trip. That's so different. Like, what am I supposed to do tonight? I'm going to a party with Eva in the city. I'm like, that's cool. But, yeah, and I just kind of remembered that card was in my drawer, the ride along. I thought that would be so different. That would be a way to kind of mix things up, change the channel, So I kind of pulled out the card and I called this dude, Officer Justice, and he picked up on the second ring, and he's like, "Hello, Justice," and I go, "Hey, hello, Officer Justice. This is Andy Dobrov. I met you in the burrito store, a few months ago." Yeah. What do you want? I was just wondering if we could schedule a ride along one of these days, And he's like, "Yeah, sure, tonight. Meet me at the station at 6:45. You know where it is?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay," And I just kind of agreed and hung up, and I couldn't believe it. It was already like 5:15. And I supposed to go and meet Eva for a party. So I called her and said, "Hey, sweetie, it looks like this guy's willing to take me on a ride along tonight. It just kind of happened spontaneously, and it's probably cool, Let's give it a shot." So I kind of jammed down to East Palo Alto. I didn't really even know where it was. Apparently, it's the station's right next to the McDonald's, and it's got this barbed wire fence surrounding it, and it's kind of intimidating. You pull up and there's nobody there to greet you. It's all kind of looking like keep out, And I pushed on the radio, and somebody buzzed me in, and when I showed up, I kind of thought maybe somebody's going to greet me and give me some orientation, but they're just like, meet us in the meeting room, in the briefing room. And I just kind of sat down there by myself. There was just this table, 4 walls, a few chairs, and then suddenly, this group of police officers came in with Justice and this other guy, and then these 2 female officers. So there were 4 police officers, and he didn't even recognize me or even shake my hand. He just said, yeah, okay, have a seat. And he started doing the briefing for the evening. And he's like, "Okay, so we have a big boxing match tonight. We've got the gangs kind of doing the rivalry thing. We're going to kind of split up in all separate cars tonight, except Officer Napoleon," and he points to the other guy next to him. "You're going to take this guy, what's your name again?" I'm like, "Andy." "Yeah, you're going to go with Andy here. And let's just be careful. This is a pretty rowdy Friday night, so everybody kind of, he gives a little talk." And I'm just like, okay. I was thinking, are you going to give me a vest, or are you going to, anything? I didn't even sign any papers. This is went out, got into Officer Napoleon's car, and he was friendly, cool dude, but he had no idea who I was. He first thought I was an officer in training, and he asked me what I did, and I said, I work at Hewlett Packard, and I was dressed in slacks and a button-up shirt. Totally, not appropriate for the occasion, really. I mean, it was, everyone had uniforms on, and probably something more casual would have been better. But the guy's like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." He didn't ask too many questions, because we immediately pulled out of the station and started to pull people over, and stuff was kind of moving quickly. There's some dude who he recognized from before who had an arrest warrant, but he didn't arrest him because we got a call from across town that one of the female officers was being harassed by somebody. So we zipped across town, and we showed up on the scene where there was all 4 officers surrounding this one perpetrator who had been really giving her a bad time, and everyone was getting in his face. And I just stayed in the car, and I was sure that that's what I'm supposed to do. And Napoleon gets back in the car after they yell at this dude, and he's like, "Oh my God, those cockroaches," you know. And I'm like, "Oh wow," you know, kind of getting into this mode of like us versus them, and it's going to be an intense night. And then he cruises around and he goes down this street called Sac Street, which is Sacramento Street, which is notorious apparently for a lot of drug dealing. Again, this is 1998. There was still quite a bit going on there. And it's a dead end street. So we pull down, and as he approaches the end of the street, all these guys standing in the shadows just start dissipating and running in different directions because you see the cop coming. He like stops and he reaches over to me because I'm apparently like sitting on his whatever, his flashlight. So I kind of delayed him by a couple of seconds. He fumbles around, grabs his flashlight, and jumps out and goes chasing this guy over the fence and then on a rooftop. So I'm literally watching Officer Napoleon scrambling a fence, then jumping on a roof and running, and he disappears, you know? And he comes back about 4 minutes later, and he's just huffing and puffing. He's like, I lost him, man. It's like, look, you know, yeah, I kind of lost a little time there. And he goes, you don't have to stay in the car all the time. And I'm like, oh, I don't. Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that. Okay. He's like, yeah. And then so we cruise back towards, the station, and we actually stopped by this convenience store that was well lit, and it was next to the U-Haul that I recognized because I had just used that U-Haul a few weeks before for our move into the new house. So I kind of felt pretty comfortable that I'm, in this little cozy area, and he pulls his car up and kind of blocks the parking lot, and gets out pretty demonstratively, and I kind of get out with him because he told me I don't have to stay in the car all the time. And we walk up, and there's this group of guys just kind of hanging out in the front. They're like, "Hey, Officer Napoleon, what's up?" And he's like, "Yeah, who's this dude with you?" And he's like, "Don't bug him. He's a detective in training." So I was kind of surprised. They got introduced to the group as the detective in training. But I was feeling pretty comfortable. And suddenly Napoleon recognizes this guy coming out of the store, had a beanie cap on. He was getting on a little motocross bike. He's like, hey, Gustavo, come here, man. How's your brother? Are you staying out of trouble? And the guy's like, yeah, it's all cool, man. He's getting nervous. And Napoleon starts frisking the crease in his beanie cap, and he pulls out a joint. And he goes, "What's going on, man? I thought you were off the stuff." And he goes, "No, man, I don't know." And he started fumbling and mumbling, and suddenly Gustavo just takes off running, just splits. And Napoleon just takes off after him. Bam! They just like disappear. So I'm like kind of standing there, wondering what to do, and there's this group of folks sort of lingering and staring at me, and I walk back to the car, and I'm just leaning against it because the car is locked. And one of the guys like, "Hey, officer, you got to move your car. You're kind of blocking the parking lot." And I'm like, "No, I'm sorry, man. I'm not the officer. I'm just waiting for the officer to come back." And they're like, "Huh." And the same dude who had asked Napoleon a little earlier who I was walks up, and he was this Pacific Islander dude. And he looked kind of friendly, and he was smiling, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on, man? It's a pretty intense night. A lot of shit going on, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man. Yeah, it's cool. I'm just waiting for the officer." And I was kind of feeling pretty calm. I wasn't intimidated by this guy. I thought he was just going to make chit chat with me. And he's like, "Yeah, this place is full of so much shit, and there's so much this." He's sort of chatting me up. And I'm like, "Yeah, just waiting for the officer." And I kind of turned and I looked to the side to see if Napoleon was coming back. And right when I turned my head, this guy just out of nowhere just cold cocks me, bam, in the side of the head. And I completely didn't expect it. I mean, just suddenly I just got thrashed across the face. And my head was just ringing and my head was spinning. And I just stumbled away from the car. And this guy who like a second ago was smiling at me was now looking just fierce and enraged. And he was like, "You effing," I won't even repeat what he was saying, but he was using the N-word and F and all this stuff. "I'm gonna kill you." And I went, "Oh my God," and I just started to run. And I was, there was parking lot was lit up, but I was just running away from the light. And the guy's like coming after me. I had this kind of loose pants, and he's like reaching for something. And I thought, "Oh my God, the guy's going to shoot me." And I just ran as fast as I could. I got out of the light. The dude didn't keep running after me, but I just kept running into the shadows and on the street. And just then a car's coming around the corner, and I didn't know what kind of car it was, but I was feeling pretty desperate. And I just run in front of the car, and it turns out to be a police officer. It turns out to be one of the female police officers who I, was in the briefing room with. And at first she didn't recognize me. She's like kind of shocked to see some dude like pounding on her hood. And then she recognizes me as the ride along and puts me in her car. And she just jams down the street to try to figure out if she can, find the guy who just hit me, because he wasn't in the parking lot anymore. And we drove around really fast. And then she took me back to the station because I'd just been hit pretty hard. And she's like, we got to check you out. I'm dropping you off and I'm going to go off to try to see if I can catch this guy. They call the paramedics. These guys come into the station and they start giving me smelling salts and figuring out if I'm okay. And I was pretty dazed. I kind of felt like I had a concussion. Everything was kind of ringing. And I was kind of okay though, but I was dazed. And then I started listening to the police radio, and they're like, there's this chase going on. We're on the southwest corner. We're going, and they're huffing and puffing. They're narrating their chase. And then they're kind of like, we got him. And I'm like, whoa, that's a trip. So I'm sitting there in the station, and a few minutes later, they bring back, well, first of all, Napoleon brings back Gustavo, who he caught. But then the two female officers brought back this guy who looked kind of different than the dude who hit me, He had his hair back. He kind of looked familiar, but I was a little bit kind of dazed. And they bring this guy in. They're like, is this the guy who hit you? And I'm like, I'm not sure, man. I don't know. And then the guy starts using the exact same words. You bitch, blah, blah, blah. Exact same words, same stream of swear words coming out of his mouth. And I'm like, oh, that's absolutely the dude, man. That's the guy that cold cocked me, So they drag him off into the interrogation room. And they're like, look, man, you look like you kind of got hit pretty good. We're probably going to have to take you down and have you checked out at Kaiser as we drop these guys off. But, and this was an interesting part. They're like, if you wanted a few minutes alone with this guy, we'd be happy to give you a chance to just kind of have a little one-on-one time with them. And I'm like, no, man, that's okay. I don't really need any one-on-one time with this guy. And I go, okay, just giving you an opportunity. And then I got in the car, in the front seat, obviously, and the two guys, Gustavo plus the guy who hit me, get in the back. And Officer Napoleon drives me to Kaiser, drops me off, sets me up to get like an x-ray and checked out. And he drives the two guys off to jail. And he's like, I'll be back. So I go in, I get checked out. I had a big black eye by that time. And got checked out, no broken jaw. My jaw was really sore, though. I could barely eat. And I waited for Napoleon to come back and pick me up. And he comes back like an hour and a half later. And he's like, look, I'm sorry it took so long, but the deputies were very displeased that this guy hit a ride-along. And let's just say that he was very apologetic, and he was actually begging for mercy. So you should feel good that, this was been taken care of. And I was like, okay, all right, and I was still kind of dazed. And I come back to the station, and the immediate focus was on making sure that I signed a disclaimer or whatever, an exemption for, any injuries and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, guys, I'm not blaming this on you guys or anything. It's fine. And then he's like, look, do you want to finish up the ride along? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, how much time do you got? He goes, I don't know, like another hour. So I got back in his car, cruised around. I was just kind of a little bit in shock, but I just figured I would cruise around with him some more. And it was pretty uneventful for the rest of the night. But when I was leaving, I had this big black eye. I was kind of still dazed. And as I was driving out of the station, an officer was coming in to, on duty, who I had seen earlier that evening when I came in. And he was like, hey, you're the ride-along. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, cool. He goes, did anything happen tonight? I'm like, well, yeah, man. I got cold-cocked and ended up in the hospital, and, everything seems to be okay. He goes, yeah, I heard about that, man, but did anything happen? And I'm like, oh, I see. So that's not really a big event, just getting hit, So I came home, and Eva was absolutely shocked, and I walked around with a black eye for a few days. But it was a hell of an experience, man. It gave me a lot of respect for what these guys go through on a day-to-day basis, and it also taught me how quickly I personally shifted from being kind of a citizen of the community to kind of feeling like, I'm part of an elite group and I have to watch everybody's back, and it's like us versus them. So in some ways, I almost felt like I became a borderline corrupt cop in one evening just by doing the ride-along. So long story, But that's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening.